you, Gleb. That was really interesting insight. And yeah, so I'll kick off the presentations again. I'm Sophie, and I'm going to tell you about the work I've done at faculty. And so there's one place in London that behaves completely different to anywhere else. And we're actually all there right now. The City of London is only 1.12 square miles, and it goes from Temple in the west to the Tower of London in the east. And it's the financial district for London and the UK as a whole. And it's also got its own governing body and its own police force. But it's also unique in its demographic. And so only 8,000 residents call the City of London home. And compare that to the massive 513,000 people who commute in daily for work. And it's this huge disparity between those 8,000 who live here and that huge commuting workforce that meant that COVID-19 hit the City of London like nowhere else. So you can imagine, on that first lockdown, when workers were encouraged to work from home, the city was left like a ghost town. Endless offices and closed preps on every high street. And the city has started to recover, but both, on its daily activity, it's completely changed. And as people have started to return, some have mindedly returned to offices, and some have stayed hybrid working or working from home. And so the daily use of the city has completely changed, and it might never be the same again. And this is a massive problem for those who are running the city, because it means that the demand for services will change as the use of the city does. And so if we want to think about service provision, we need to know what the daily use is. So for an example of that, say that Thursday is now the busiest day in the city, and after work, that's when people are going out socialising and drinking. And so if they know this, the City of London Police might then decide that actually, on a Thursday, they'll put a few more officers out in the streets and provide the service that's needed. And so we need to understand the daily activity of the city to then think about that service provision. And that's what this project looked to kind of tackle. So the first part of the project was more about scoping out data that was available. So we looked at data sets that could indicate activity across different aspects of the city life. And these were mainly then we looked at publicly available data sets, so open source, and ones that had a high amount of change, so on a daily rate, so that they had the level of detail that we needed. And we actually found loads of really interesting kind of data sources. These included restaurant reservations, air pollution, and then transport use. And so the next step was actually analysing the data to see how COVID-19 has impacted how residents, visitors, and most importantly, workers actually use the city. And we found loads of really fascinating insights from all of these, and I'm just going to present one example. And that's to do with how people were travelling into the city then and around it. And so we could see that actually preemptive to that first government lockdown, which are given by the grey vertical lines, businesses and companies were already reacting. And we see that there was a dramatic decrease in the use of the London Tube compared to that 2019 level, which is our baseline. And even though while it started to recover, tube usage is only recovering very slowly and very gradual, and it's only about 50% of what it was in 2019. And so we can work out from this that people are actually looking for more socially distanced, safer ways to travel, and that includes cycle hires. And so while cycle hires were affected by COVID-19, they've actually recovered at a much faster rate, and sometimes we get levels that are higher than 2019 use. And interestingly, before each of the lockdowns, we see these spikes in cycle hires. And so people actually travelling and commuting in a different way. And there are loads of really interesting insights like this, but we're not just interested in the activity of the city now. If we're thinking about predicting future services, we want to be able to predict what the activity might look like. And so we took this idea and we tried to develop a kind of proof of concept model that you could predict the activity of the city. So we used footfall as a metric and why footfall. And that's because it can kind of give us ideas about a different range of services rather than just a single specific one. This was also due to some limitations in some of the data sets, such as kind of crime counts, which meant we couldn't use them as a sole predictive tool. So to kind of quantify footfall, we actually had to use Google mobility data. And this was data from Google where they've quantified mobility across different aspects of life, so retail and recreation, the use of parks, and most importantly, the workplace for us. And we combined all of this data into one single mobility metric that could give us a proxy for footfall. And so from this then metric, we trained a kind of simple model that would then be able to forecast what the footfall would then look like. And our forecast actually works pretty well. We managed to pick up weekly trends that we were seeing in all of the data sets. And with it, we managed to then forecast 7 days into the future. And that's really important because it gives us a view on what the next week will look like, which is important for service provision. And this idea of kind of this predictive power comes at a really good time as the City of London Corporation are thinking about how to change the city and adapt in terms of the infrastructure as well. And so, to summarise, the project we made kind of identified data sets, which you wouldn't normally think of, that show how COVID-19 has impacted the city. And then we thought about and we developed a proof of concept model to actually forecast activity. And that can be used to then derive kind of service provision going forward and change how our city looks and works. Thank you.